Well, I don't see major effects on Nigeria. The only area where we might see effects to Nigeria is on the price of crude oil, right? The wholesale Dutch, the Western Texas Intermediate, the WTI, in Nigeria, by the way, produces light crude and heavy crude, and Nigeria usually has a benchmark of crude oil price of like $5 to $7 below the international price quoted at the International Commodities Exchange, at which the Nigerian government sells oil through the OPEC, right? So what we might see is a positive effect of the strikes in Syria, because usually when the stock markets go down like this, it affects the dollar index negatively, and when the dollar index is affected negatively, the price of crude oil tends to appreciate. But on the likelihood of crude oil price going to like $150, $180 per barrel, I doubt. Because when you consider the fact that America has said that by 2015, the US government will start exporting crude oil to other countries in the world, then the chances of crude oil price going down much is highly unlikely. From a Syria strike, is highly unlikely.
Nigeria just concluded her 19th National Economic Summit Group, and chairman of the NESG, Mr. Folusho Phillips, said that it was time for Nigeria to go back to what was her threshold economically before the discovery of crude oil. What's your take on that conference focused on agriculture? The dream of the President Jonathan administration that Nigeria must diversify on crude oil. Are you seeing those results manifest?
Well, when you look at the agricultural sector in Nigeria, so much has been talked about it. The recent proposal by the chairman of Dangote Group, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, of investing in a plant for producing fertilizer, it's a welcome project. The fact that it's going to employ about 8,500 jobs, it's a laudable idea. But it's also very important. I want to draw from a quote that the chairman of Hess Holdings, Mr. Tony Elumelu, said about agriculture in Nigeria. He said that we should stop looking at agriculture as a government project and start seeing agriculture as a business, and the government the government as a regulator and the provider of a framework and a structure on which agriculture will run in Nigeria. We need to move the subsidy from the petroleum sector to the agricultural sector.
We need to move the subsidy from petroleum.
We need to move the subsidy from the petroleum sector.
2012,
exactly. All the fight and the protest about the removal of subsidy. Yes. We can't talk so much about it because we've already talked too much about the subsidy in the petroleum sector and all of the fight that came from it. But the important thing is we need to move subsidy from petroleum to agricultural sector. We need to realize that agriculture is a big business, and if we take it seriously, it's going to be a source of revenue for the federal government, and it's going to increase our GDP. It's going to improve the standard of living of a lot of unemployed people in Nigeria. You know, it's amazing to realize that 65 to 70% of the average student that graduates from a university in Nigeria, if you ask them what's your plan for the future, they tell you they want to work for one of the oil companies. They want to work for Chevron, Mobil, or Shell, or Adax. Well, in the reality of it, or Total, or Saipem, or any of those oil companies, but in the reality of it, how many of those oil jobs are available for young people in Nigeria? Number two, how skilled are they to manage those jobs? Because the company still has to take them through years and years of training for them to be professionals at what they do, right? So at the end of the day, they end up bringing expatriates to Nigeria who take up those jobs. But the important point is, if we look at agriculture, we consider the fact that we spend about $1.1 billion importing chicken, turkey, every year. We spend about $1.1 billion importing the concentrates that's used to produce fruit juice. We spend about $2 billion importing rice to Nigeria, and so many other staples and basic agricultural commodities. If you consider the fact that Nigeria spends about $6 to $7 billion importing food every year, then you know that our food security is threatened. The reason why there was the Arab Spring was because of food insecurity in the Middle East and in Arab countries. The first thing that every government should ensure its citizens is food security. If there is no food security, how do you expect that citizens will be at bay? You have inflation at 12%. You have an army of unemployed people. You have an army of unemployed people who are complaining, who are angry, who are agitating for change. What's the first thing that the government should focus on? Agriculture. Move the subsidy from the petroleum sector to the agricultural sector. Let it be fertilizers. Ban importation of rice. But before you ban importation of rice, ensure that the structures for the growing of rice, the preservation of rice, the distribution of rice, right, is secured.
Those are things that Dr. Adesina, the Minister of Agriculture, have already been doing, and they've started the initiatives.
Exactly. So, we can't overstate the effect that the revamp of the Nigerian agricultural sector will have on the economy. We can't overstate it because there are countries in the Far East that rely totally on the agricultural products. But one thing we have to underline, and one thing that is noteworthy, one thing that is very important and critical to take out from this talk, is the fact that agriculture is not a government program. Yes. Agriculture is not an extension of government policy. Agriculture is a business. The sooner we begin to realize that agriculture is a business that should be taken seriously, and the government has a role to play in it, the better for us. The point essentially is that we have to go outside of the companies that have succeeded to the companies that can succeed in the future. We have not to ignore the companies that have succeeded, but we have to realize that the strength of every nation, the strength of every competitive nation is not only in the companies that are doing well and the companies that are employing thousands of employees and paying a lot of tax. It's in the companies that have the potential of succeeding in the future, the companies that can buck the trends in the future, the companies that can succeed in technology, in finance, in healthcare, in agriculture, in using Nigeria as a case study. So, for example, we can look at companies that will not only invest in agriculture, like the success stories of Cargill, which is the biggest agricultural firm that has capitalization of more than $100 billion in America. We can look at companies in Nigeria that will invest in setting up infrastructure for agriculture, right? In mechanizing agriculture. We can look at companies that will be involved in distribution of agricultural commodities. We can look at companies that can set up plants for making fertilizer or set up plants for making concentrates. That's the future of Nigeria. We need to go beyond the companies, the few companies that are doing very well, to the companies that can buck the trend of the economy. And the future of Nigeria is not in the petroleum system. The petroleum system has future with the reforms of the petroleum industry, with the petroleum industry bill, but we need to realize that the future of Nigeria is in agriculture. And the sooner we begin to realize the truth in the statement of Mr. Lumelu when he said that agriculture is not a government policy and it's not a government program that is time-bound. Agriculture is a business that should be taken seriously with the government as a regulator and the provider of a framework and a structure, the better for us.